will call the meeting to order. Thank you for all being here. First order of business is the election of the permanent chair. I'll entertain a nomination.
I would make a motion that you remain as chair.
You're the best.
I will second that.
I'll accept. All those in favor? Oh, any other nominations? I move the nominations closed. All right, I'll accept. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. By the way, you're all set. I wanna go on your time, and Derek, I wanna go on your time. So Derek Barabee is here. He's gonna be our recording secretary. I think maybe out of an abundance of caution, what we should do also is have a vice chair, just in case I can't be here, a vice chair and maybe a corresponding secretary in case. I mean, I can do a lot from my office and send out a lot of stuff over email, so I don't expect that to be too much, but who would like to be corresponding secretary? Vice chair?
What does that mean?
It means
He's taking the notes, he's gonna do that,
No,
right?
he's gonna do that. If anything has to be sent out, if something has to be sent out and I call you up and say, send it out, please send it out. But it's more of a backup for me in case I'm not here for whatever reason.
I can do that.
Would somebody nominate David?
I'll nominate David Lee for corresponding secretary.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Or any other nominations? Nominations be closed. All those in favor of David Lee for vice chair, corresponding secretary, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much. Okay, second order of business.
Did you want vice chair?
That's our vice chair. He's our vice chair.
Oh, I think so, corresponding secretary.
Slash.
Oh,
Vice chair,
slash.
vice chair, because I don't expect, hopefully I'll be here to be to all the meetings and hopefully there's not gonna be any corresponding meeting. So,
Yeah.
there you go. So, but in any
Vice president.
We're fortunate tonight to have here with us Steve Mednick. Steve is an expert in, I guess you call it home rule law, and he is our attorney, and he is going to give us a bit of an orientation before we start. The law also says, well, they'll tell you what the law is, I'm sure. Go ahead.
I'll try. I'll do my best. So I'll walk you through this, and if you're having problems sleeping, I can call you with the same speech any night that you'd like me to do. I'll be happy to talk about it. Home rule. Everybody thinks they know what home rule is. I argue that home rule is a misnomer. It doesn't really, it seems self-evident, but it's not so self-evident. Some believe that home rule invokes the concept of local control, sovereignty, local authority. Some of those things are true. One thing that's not true is sovereignty. But it's a misnomer when you think about it in the broad sense, rife with ambiguity and misunderstanding. A few years ago, the ACIR, which is the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, asked me to work on developing a definition of home rule that was fairly understandable. And we did it over not a paragraph or two paragraphs, 3 pages, and I won't read you the whole thing. But what we're trying to do is try to come up with a concept that help people in the 21st century understand some of these ancient rules that go back to the Civil War period. And home rule in the United States really started right after the Civil War. And I'm going to go through this because I think it's important to understand these concepts. So I'm trying not to be too technical or too legal. You will not be able to get any continuing legal education credits from this presentation, or maybe you could petition the bar. But there was a case in the Midwest called Dillon's Rule. The judge in the case was named Dillon. It was Clinton versus Cedar Rapids Railroad in Iowa in 1868. And that case came out with the proposition, this is very important, that a municipal corporation, see, that's what you need to understand, is that you're not, we call ourselves a government, we are a government, we are the government for the local, the operation of the local municipality, but we are a municipal corporation. All of our local governments are corporations, municipal corporations. And they can only exercise in Connecticut and in other states that follow Dillon's rule those powers that are expressly granted to them, that are necessarily or fairly implied or in or incident to those express grants of authority, and that are essential to the declared objects and purposes of the corporation, not merely convenient, not not because you want to do it, but because they're indispensable to the operation of the government. Dillon's rule has been validated by the US Supreme Court at the beginning of the last century, the 20th century, where they codified the rule and settled the issue of local government legal authority by asserting that all sovereign authority in the United States resides in only two places, the federal government and the state government. So local government has no inherent rights, no implicit rights, no implied rights, and no God-given rights. They only have the rights that these two sovereigns, but particularly in the state of Connecticut, that the state of Connecticut provides to the local government. We'll talk about that in a minute and how that gets articulated. We've had a few constitutions in Connecticut. The Constitution of 1818 covered us for most of our history through 1965, and there was no mention of home rule, as if municipalities did not exist. And these municipalities have existed for a long time. You just go to the borders of each town in the state of Connecticut, you'll see they were established in 1765 or 1812 or whatever it might be, but you wouldn't know it by looking at the state constitution. In 1957, they passed the Home Rule Act. Up until the late 50s and early 1960s, we had counties in Connecticut. Like many other governments continue to have counties or metropolitan governments. We eliminated our counties with the Home Rule Act in 1957. And the major intent of the Home Rule Act was to allow for local governments, under the express grants given to it by the state, to create their own local charters, their own local constitutions, their local rules for the operation of the government. And there was a rationale. The rationale was that prior to that time, it was the legislature that granted you your governing documents. If you wanted to have a local government that operated legally in the state of Connecticut, the General Assembly would grant you a charter under a special act. I believe yours is all a home rule charter, but in some of the larger cities, most of the larger cities, you still have provisions. When I'm doing charter revisions in all the big cities, you have to be mindful of special act provisions that you don't want to eliminate, because if you eliminate them, you don't have the power any longer.
We have a special act that created the borough of Stonington, but that's still.
Yeah, a lot of the boroughs are special act entities or associational entities, and so the intent was to alleviate from the legislature that function, so that they don't have to go out and do those kinds of things. I'll give you a couple of examples if you're interested. And I haven't studied your charter intimately yet to see whether there's anything like that in here, but I just discovered something in Waterbury. Waterbury has some very unique functions. There's a lot of stuff in Waterbury. My hometown, so be careful, but my parents are buried there, so it's sacred ground. But there's a few things, and New Britain is another good example. There's a lot of good examples I can give you, but Waterbury has something called the water police. What's the water police? The water police is designed to protect the water sources for Waterbury, Connecticut. Up in Bantam Lake, Winstead, all those places. In fact, the flood of 1955, if you're all Connecticut natives, I think you're from Rhode Island originally, but if you're all from this part of the world, you know that there was a massive flood down the Naugatuck River through the Naugatuck Valley. And so Waterbury, by special act, has the ability to enforce and protect water sources, particularly Bantam Lake, of all places. And they have a house. The current police chief was living in the house that is the water police headquarters on the lake in Bantam. I just said, it'd be a nice retirement home. Can I become the chief of the water police, It's not a heavy job, I could go up there and do it. That's a unique kind of power. They also have unique and interesting powers with boards of education. Do you have a local board of education?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a local board of education, very often in a lot of communities, there's conflicts between the general government and boards of education.
No.
Really? Okay, good. So I know what I'm talking about. Right, good. Master the obvious. And so they do have unique authority. You can't affect their line items in their budget. They have the ability to hire the superintendent with a 3-year contract, so you don't have to go to the local council or the town meeting to approve a multi-year contract, which you have to for any other contracts. They can do collective bargaining, there's a teacher negotiating act. The Board of Ed can approve the contract. However, the pension provisions have to go to the Board of Selectmen or town council or town meeting for approval. And Waterbury has a provision in their charter that gives the mayor the ability to veto actions of the Board of Ed. And he just used it a week ago to veto their decision to give the school superintendent a 3-year agreement. He wanted to give a 1-year agreement because he does not believe the superintendent deserves more than that. And I said, wow, interesting. No one's challenging it. It's very unique. Mayors do not have that kind of control over boards of ed anywhere else in the state of Connecticut, anywhere else.
What about you were talking about Bantam Lake. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers have littoral and riparian rights to, and we're usually creatures of the state, so who supersedes who?
We would be inferior to the federal government and the state. If the state or the federal government were to assert any rights, they would be superior to our right. We have a right, Waterbury has a right to assert its rights over the people of Bantam.
Right.
All right, but if the feds or the state came in, we gotta move to the side. My parents used to live, after they moved from Waterbury, they lived in Newington, Connecticut, just outside of Hartford. And I was doing a charter in New Britain, and I told them to be very careful. He said, well, why? Well, there's a New Britain militia. In their charter, there is a militia that is designed to protect the borders of New Britain and Newington, where my parents lived, about a mile away, and West Hartford and Farmington, all in that portion, because there are a lot of controversial boundary issues between those towns, and they had the authority to create a militia. New Britain also has the ability to go into Cromwell, where their reservoir is, kind of like the water police, and condemn property to protect the reservoir, which is owned by the city, but it's in another town, but the state gave them the ability to engage in eminent domain condemnation to protect their land. And I don't want to get myself in trouble. I did last week in Salem. Somebody called me and said, "You're not advocating gun control, are you?" And I said, "No. It's not really a charter issue. It's an example. You don't have local ability to regulate guns. I found that out in the 1980s when I was a young alderman, and I wanted to do something about gun control, and there's just no express grant of authority. And I tried to go through zoning and health, and there was no way to do it in the end. Last year, I was modifying most comprehensive charter revision I've ever done in Norwalk to the 1913 charter that was written in basically 19th century language, and not even early 20th century language, and modernized it. But I found in their charter, in their special acts, the ability to regulate firearms. So Norwalk has the ability to regulate firearms. We'll see what they do and see how fast that goes to the Supreme Court when the NRA finds out about it, but they have that ability. So those are examples of how the legislature used to create unique powers for local government.
When's the last unique power that was granted by the legislature?
When?
It's not something they regularly do, right?
No, not anymore. They don't really do a lot of special acts anymore. But what you're gonna find in the legislature, and I'm guilty of this as well, we've had to go to the legislature for general authority to do something because we found there was an impediment in our charter that prevented us from, in one of my communities, being able to do something. So we went to the legislature, and what we did so that we did not impact other communities, we said, for municipalities, the population between 40,000 and 43,000, which was the community I was representing, whatever it was we were changing. So it's general legislation, but
For highly tailored, so
Highly
it's
tailored.
not spot zoning per se.
yeah, it's
right?
not a total custom designed suit, but it's a really nice tailored suit is what we did for that particular community. And so then in 1965, we passed the Constitution of 1965, and that did establish home rule as a constitutional matter. It basically adopted Dillon's rule, the 3 rules that I told you about at the beginning, and those are in our state constitution.
Who passes the Constitution?
The state of Connecticut passed a new constitution in
No.
1965.
People who live in it, or the
Oh, no, the state constitution passed by the voters ultimately,
Oh, yeah.
and there's a constitutional convention. Local charters is local. Which is what you're
But the
doing.
state constitution.
The state
is a
constitution
voting-
now has home rule. It says you have the ability
But-
to do those things.
Voters passed that.
Voters passed that and this. is what it comes down to. So, you know, it's an artifice, it's a construct for the orderly operation of local government under the superior state constitutional and legislative authority of the state. And as I said before, local governments have no local or inherent authority. So I want to point out one other thing. One of the first things, I almost guarantee this, I won't bet anybody, that's not appropriate in a public setting. But I almost guarantee that somebody is gonna come in and say they wanna have term limits for local officials. It's always
We already
something.
have them.
You have term limits?
Yes, that was passed in the last charter revision.
Board of
And
Finance.
Board of Finance, Board of Ed, there's a couple of other committees that
Planning and
have them.
zoning.
Planning and zoning has them.
Are those
And,
elected positions?
Two of the boards are.
Well, it's questionable whether that's legal. I was just gonna tell you that, they
Because-
always come to me and ask me whether that's legal. And I argued a case of the state Supreme Court regarding recall. And, in 1986 or 87, I was a young lawyer, and I got to argue this case for Watertown, Connecticut, for the town clerk of Watertown. And, where they tried to recall, a member of their city council or the board of selectmen, I forget which office it was. And I said to them, look, I don't think that recall is legal because there's no express grant of authority for recall in the state of Connecticut. And the Supreme Court ultimately upheld that position, except for the 5 communities that have special act recall. So unless your term limits are legally granted to you by special act, if somebody were to ask me, I would tell you that it's highly unlikely that they are valid.
That's interesting, because the police commission has them, I mean, there's a number.
It's not elected though, police commission.
Well, oh, it has to be
If
elected.
they're unelected,
Oh, then you can.
you can limit service on boards and commissions so that you can, you know, get different people to serve on
But
different boards.
elected not.
But elected, it's highly unlikely. I will tell you this politically, I keep my ears closed, I keep my eyes closed, we'll talk to your town attorney. It's probably not worth trying to invalidate it, we tried doing that.
Oh, we could have fun.
Oh, no, it would be deadly. Let me tell you, I was hired by Bristol by the mayor. It was a Democratic town, all Democratic, 100% Democratic members of the council. I was talking to their corporation council one day, and he asked me the question. He said, I don't think these are legal. What do you think? I've been told you're the guy. I said, no, I don't believe they're legal at all. And I issued an opinion, the charter commission took them out of the charter. They're going through the charter process, and everybody goes nuts. The place goes nuts, and then they end up leaving them in, and people were so outraged. The mayor was thrown out. Every Democrat was thrown out. It was a total flip. I've never seen a flip of one party to another over that. And to this day, the mayor, every time I call her, says, "What trouble are you going to cause me now?" And I said, "You guys hired me. I didn't go looking for trouble." But so you need to think about that politically, whether you're going to play around with them. And I'm just going to say, and I will say it publicly, I don't think they're valid.
Well, who's the enforcing agency if you violate the state statutes in your charter? What happens? Suppose.
Somebody can challenge it in court.
So, but they'd have to go all the way through court, which is obviously an impediment, no one's gonna do it,
Hard to
you pay
do,
the money.
yeah.
So in effect, you can basically have an illegal charter.
You can get away with the illegal term. But if somebody challenges it, you can question whether any of the acts that they took were legal, because that the person was, if they're limiting people, then there's really no damage because you got a new person voting and the person's valid, but that person who was limited, term limited, has a right to say, I could have run again, and you limited my right to run. It probably wouldn't affect any actions of the body, it just would affect them, and they would argue their constitutional right to run for
Now, does
office.
it invalidate the charter when you lose something like that? How does it?
It would
impact the
invalidate
charter?
those provisions of the charter,
So
yeah.
would it be the whole charter or just that
just
provision?
those provisions,
Just that
yeah,
specific
just those
provision?
provisions.
But practically, they made it impossible to enforce. Because nobody is going to
In
spend
all
money
likelihood,
in the 10 years it
I
would
did
take
not know
to.
that somebody's gonna have that.
Well, it's been fair on both sides. I mean, when they limited the term limits, it was on both parties, you still had to have,
Everybody has the,
but it's
every-
still.
both parties, all parties, and have the limitations, so. But here's the point I was gonna make, and I'll make it with regard to the term limits. Wilton has term limits, and I know Wilton well, I represent the COG in Western Connecticut, and I know the town attorney out there, I know the former first selectwoman, and I called them up and said, tell me, how did you end up with term limits? And Ira said to me, the town attorney said, I didn't know we had them. I said, well, you're the council during charter revision. I didn't really do much on the charter. We had a lawyer who was chairing it. And I said, who's the lawyer? He told me who the lawyer was. He was a very prominent Hartford lawyer. And I called him up and I said, hey, tell me, how did you end up with term limits in that last charter revision? He said, well, there was nothing that said we couldn't do it. That is not the rule.
Okay.
That is not the rule. Silence is not the rule. Remember, express grants of authority. There is no express grant of authority for recall. There is no express grant of authority to limit terms of elective office. That is not a matter of local concern. Title IX governs elections in the state of Connecticut, and you can't pass a local election law that would subvert an election. The reason you can limit the service on a local board or commission that's not an elected board or commission is because you're dealing with the operation of your local government, and you have that ability to limit those people, and so those positions. So silence is not authority. Remember, express grants of authority. That's what you got to remember. Every meeting, every time an issue comes up, there needs to be some validating state law that permits you to do what you're going to do. So again, we're a creature of the state. I'm not going to give you my Frankenstein quote tonight. I sometimes think creature of the state sounds like it's something out of Mary Shelley's novel. But
Sometimes it is.
what's that? It's like, and it probably is many, many times. So the express grants of authority affect everything you do. It can affect your structure. In a local government, there are only two required provisions in a charter. You have to have an executive, and you're the first selectman and the board of selectmen here in Stonington, and you have to have a legislative body. And so, the boards of selectmen sometimes have some legislative, quasi-legislative functions, and you have a town meeting that would have the remainder of the legislative functions. Those are the only two requirements that you have, is you have to have those two provisions. But you also have express grants of authority to deal with your functions and how, what the first selectman or woman can do in their job, what the tax collector can do, what the other officials can do, and those things all need to be in the powers. There's a section of the statutes called the municipal powers provision, and it's a very extensive provision. I'll get it to you so you can see what the powers are. And that was a very useful tool for me in Norwalk, because in Norwalk, they had like 97 express grants of authority in their old 1913 charter. And I said that you don't need those. Oh, but how are we gonna do the streets? Look at the Municipal Powers Act. All that is here. You don't even need to put it in your charter. It's in the law. Those laws, with an exception of something that happened last year, I'll tell you the war story at some point, very, very unusual to dilute that authority. It's always expanding the authority under the, and you'll see some of the things in the Municipal Powers Act that you'll recognize as relatively new things. So it impacts your fiscal, the ability to operate the government. A lot of fiscal things from assessments and tax collection are really controlled by state. So the express grant of authority comes from the state that gives your tax collector and your assessors the ability to do their job. Personnel, I'll tell you something that a lot of people don't know, and should know, but they don't know, is that your ability to conduct your government, this tells you how diminished the authority of the local government is. There's something called the Municipal Employee Relations Act. MIRA is what it's commonly known as, and that's the collective bargaining law of the state of Connecticut. That law, there's a provision of that law that gives collective bargaining agreements supremacy over local law, over local charters, local ordinances. And the way I found out about my rude awakening as a young alderman is the New Haven Charter, for whatever reason, I don't know, had twice a week garbage collection in the charter. It was a constitutional right. It was a local right to have garbage picked up twice a week in New Haven. And so I'm a brand new alderman, I'm getting these calls, and my wife said something, she said, how come the garbage is just picked up once a week now? And I said, there's gotta be something wrong with that. And I started getting called from constituents, and I finally called City Hall, said, what's going on here? They said, oh, we had a collective bargaining agreement, and the public works employees just wanna pick it up once a week, and we agreed. And your Board of Aldermen approved it. I was not on the Board of Aldermen that approved it, but they approved it, and it has the effect of law. It eliminated the ability of our charter to govern. I went through a situation in one of my communities where there was a local police shooting, very controversial matter. Charter had very detailed provisions on how you discipline police, how you deal with the police, and I had to get in front of a crowd of 700 angry people who were saying, the charter says this, the charter says this, and I had to get up and try to explain, yes, you're right, but here's the collective bargaining agreement. Boo, boo, and I said, how many of you support your local unions? Yay, local unions. Well, talk to your local union, they got rid of it. It's in their collective bargaining agreement that was approved. And so that's something you need to understand as well. I'm going through that in New Haven right now.
Does the town have the right to avoid arbitration in labor negotiations, or is that a state
That's
statute?
state statute, that's mirrored. The one I'm just talking about, yeah, it's very powerful law. I have a case where the Board of Aldermen in New Haven, the Board of Alders in New Haven is suing the mayor of New Haven. I'm representing the Board of Alders in that action because Mayor DeStefano, who I was his corporation counsel, after I left his corp counsel, came to an agreement with union leaders to provide a bump up on benefits for union leaders, for the president and vice president of the union. It wasn't part of the collective bargaining agreement, it was a side deal that was cut at the same time that the collective bargaining agreement was being negotiated and approved, but they didn't submit it, and it originally impacted pensions. Well, the mayor has no authority to impact a pension. You have to go to the pension board. They have fiduciary obligations, they have to respond to the Internal Revenue Service and Internal Revenue Code, and so 16 years later, we have a new mayor. He was supported by the fire union. One of the big fire guys was, one of the union leaders was retiring. He said, no, I didn't negotiate this, but I can get the benefit of this thing. And it's, and so they could not get a pension enhancement. They realized that, so they renegotiated it to create an annuity. And to create the annuity, it was $400,000 so this guy could get,
It's the same thing.
it's the same thing to get money the rest of his life, and then his wife gets it the rest of her life if she outlives him. But there's a problem. It's a multi-year agreement, and they transferred $400,000, and we have a local ordinance that says anything in excess of $100,000 has to go to the Board of Aldermen for approval. And frankly, under the charter and under state law, anything that's a multi-year agreement has to go to the legislative body. And so we're in litigation right now, and we will win that litigation, which I'm happy about. This will be a good case to have out there, but
Cost you $1 million to do it, but.
they paid me a lot of money to do
Yeah,
that,
that's-
and the mayor's paying the other lawyers to do it. So the city's paying both sides of the legal argument, which is foolish, but it goes to that issue of authority. They're arguing under MIRA, the mayor has superior rights. The mayor doesn't have any rights under MIRA to circumvent the legislative body. If the labor board or a court imposes a judgment, then we all have to respond. The legislative body has to acquiesce, the mayor has to acquiesce, there's no, you can appeal it to the Supreme Court, but you have to acquiesce there. But the mayor doesn't have the ability to do that. So the charter is your blueprint for government, it's your operational document. The goals of a charter revision are clarity. You want to be able to look at your charter and understand it. I'm a deep believer that, and I think you're pretty good in this regard, you don't have a lot of walls of words, where you just have endless paragraphs that take up a page and you have to figure out what the subject matter is. This charter actually nicely breaks down a lot of your things. So I haven't, again, read every word of your charter to know whether there are things that need to be clarified. But you know, I think that it's a clear document anyhow, and an organized document. You want to have flexibility. You want to establish rules that will be followed. And you want to make sure, the last point I talk about is the culture of disregard or paralysis. You want to avoid having a charter that is so ambiguous that you end up with a town attorney, as I've seen, come to you and answer the question like, counselor, what's the legal authority for your position that allows you to, the mayor, to do this thing? Oh, Steve, it's called the rule of practical wisdom. And no, there's no, as corporation counsel member, I never invoke the rule of practical wisdom. It's either in the law or it's not in the law. You can't make it up. And if you have to make it up because your charter is ambiguous, then you need to fix that provision of the charter, is what it comes down to. So you want to have clarity, you want to have flexibility, you want to have the ability to conduct business within a rule set, but you also want to have the ability in a community to respond to the contemporary needs of the town. I don't know what the civic culture is in Stonington. A lot of communities throughout the state of Connecticut, big and small, are facing problems of the lack of public participation. People don't want to go to board and commission meetings any longer. And so a lot of communities are having problems filling boards. One of my cities has come to me and said, Steve, can we modify the quorum rule so that the quorum isn't the majority of the members? And I said, yeah, beware though. I mean, if you have a 9-member board and the quorum rule is 5, you'd have 5 people to run a meeting, so you could win something 3-2, that's bad enough. Where you pass something 3 of the 9 members instead of 6 of the 9 members is not a good place to be. Or 5
Except
of
there
the
is
9
a practical consideration there, because that prompts 9 people to show up the next time. You know,
Yeah.
we have to
Yeah.
be realistic too.
No, yeah, I got that, but the point is, a lot of communities are having I'm doing a charter revision in Waterbury, as I said, and because it's a temporary commission, we ended up getting this horrible little room that we use in City Hall, and the Fair Rent Commission gets this beautiful room, and there's no one there. They haven't had a quorum in a month, so we've been able to move all of our meetings into the larger room, because they can't get a quorum. And it's because they're having a hard time finding people to fill these positions. So you want to have the ability to merge entities if you need to. If you have a problem like that, you don't want to be stuck that you have to have this commission and that commission. And if they have similar subject matters, maybe one of them was a very popular fad commission 30 years ago, merge it or get rid of it. You want to have that ability. So you don't want to, what I do in a lot of my charters, in fact, I'm doing this in New Haven right now, we've moved most of our departments and most of our boards and commissions out of the charter so you can restructure them completely. We've mandated them. So you need to have a board of police commissioners, but you don't need to have it laid out in the charter. You can lay it out in the code of ordinances. It's mandated to have it, but you can do it that way.
So like our charter says you have to have a director of planning. Now, why would it say that? Wouldn't the municipal powers cover that?
Yeah, but the municipal powers gives you the ability to establish your local laws. So you could either put it in your charter that you want to have a director of planning, and the municipal powers doesn't mandate a director of planning. It permits you to have planning functions.
Okay.
And then if you
So we're elaborating on what's already permitted.
you have, and that's what your local ordinances do, and that's what your charter does. The question is whether you want to be that specific, that you need that specific position.
Well, because we don't have one right now, so therefore we're technically in violation of our own charter, right? So.
Yeah. So what you want to do in a charter is you want to make sure that the functions of the government are articulated in the charter. How you populate them is decided by ordinance. And again, I don't know the culture of the community. I'll learn that as we're going through this process. But that, when I talk about flexibility, that's what I'm talking about, is the ability to modify things, not walk away from charter obligations, but to modify things so that they meet the contemporary times that you're living in, if you need to.
But having a charter, it's more difficult to change the charter than it is an ordinance.
Exactly.
In ordinances, you could be going back every year or every 6 months if somebody had enough to petition something like that. And with the charter, with a planner, for example, I don't think it says you have to hire a planner within so many days. You have to have a planner. But there's no deadline as to when you can get the planner, and as long as you're maybe in the process of doing so, you would meet the commitment of the
Right,
of
but
the charter.
right now, I think like the select woman, maybe doesn't wanna have a director of planning, but this document, somewhere in there says, gotta have a director of planning and a director of this and a director of that and whatnot, and there's not a lot of personnel flexibility because it is dictated and directed pretty rigidly by this document, so I was.
We'll look at those things as we go through.
Yeah.
No, and I appreciate, we're sitting around a table, so ask any questions and I'll stop, so that you guys have a chance at remaining awake throughout this process. And those are really good questions. And we'll look at those things as we go through the process. Last thing is accountability. The reason you want to have flexibility and clarity is you want to be able to hold the local government accountable. So you want the public to understand this is what they're supposed to be doing. If they're not doing it, they should be asking why they're not doing it. Why are you doing this when the charter says that? Now, they could come back and say, collective bargaining agreement made us do it. And that's a legitimate answer. Or rule of practicalism, we just want to, no, that's not a legitimate answer. And it's up to the public then to hold people accountable. So those are the reasons you want to really clarify a charter in that way. So let's talk about you, the commission, and what you're going to be doing. Your resolution does have some recommendations of changes, and we also have the red line that the first selectwoman proposed, and you're very lucky that that's not an extensive list. In Stanford last year, there were 123 items on the list, which was daunting and absurd. This is a manageable list, but that's just the beginning of defining your scope, because you have the ability as a commission to take a look at the full charter and to decide what's other structural changes, idiomatic changes, grammatical changes, editorial changes that you want to make, or even structural changes that you want to make. And so the scope of the enterprise will be governed by the resolution that they adopted. I'll talk about this in a moment. Well, I'll talk about it right now. The next thing you're going to be doing before you can do any substantive work, you need to have your public hearing. You have 2 required statutory public hearings. You have, which will be your next meeting. And
Question?
yes,
So when you have that public hearing, it's not for us to go forth with a recommendation, it's to hear what people want for us to make a recommendation?
correct. The first statutory public hearing is to hear from the public to help you with the scope of the enterprise. So you'll get a sense from the public what they want you to think about in the charter. And so you'll come away from that meeting with that, whatever the list is, whatever the members of the public come to you with, that's what you're gonna look at.
Question? Sorry, one
Please.
question person.
Don't,
So let's say.
I figured that out. I'm a master of the obvious.
Well, so the public comes to us and they want, this and they want that, and they want all these things that are not part of this scope. And let's say that we chose to abide by the public's wishes, this thing goes back to the first selectman, does it not?
I'll explain it all, yeah.
Okay.
Let me walk through it, because I will explain all that to you. Because you're prompting me. That's a good
Oh, I'm sorry.
prompt. No, it's a good prompt, because you're right on point. And I'm gonna make a couple points about that. So you have the statutory public hearing. I usually recommend after the statutory public hearing, the next meeting, inviting the first selectman, members of the board of selectmen, members of other boards and commissions, have them come in. The selectmen will probably talk about these things that are in the resolution. Probably talk about the markup that she made. I think they're mainly these things. And their vision of what it is you should be doing. And it's an opportunity for them in public to articulate their position. Other members of the board of selectmen may have slightly different points of view. Other boards and commissions may have points of view. And that would be another opportunity to hear what they're interested in doing. Then the meeting after that I always recommend is your town attorney and I would sit with you and literally walk through page by page the charter. Not reading, we're not gonna read the charter to you, but it's what I call a red line session.
Yeah.
So the town attorney can say, I've had problems with section 3-4, I'm not saying that's a problem. And here's why it's a problem, I want you to think about that, it would be very helpful to fix that pothole.
So are you guys going to posit to us what is conflicting with state statutes in this charter? Is that part of what you will do for us?
We'll go through it and figure that out if there are any conflicts with state statute. I hope there aren't.
Well,
except
there
for
are,
the-
because
except for
we know we
recall.
have one.
Yeah, the recall.
So.
Yeah, I'll definitely,
Okay.
and I don't wanna get you in trouble with my legal opinion, so we'll need to figure out how politically you guys wanna deal with it. And so then you have the red line session, and then you develop your priorities. At that point, you've gone through the public hearing, you've got the resolution, you got the public hearing, you have your live meeting with leadership, and you have the lawyers who've gone through and redlined the document with you, looked at the, and it's gonna be more of his show than my show. I will be looking at it with an eye on, this is proved problematic in other communities, et cetera. And I'm not gonna try to make trouble and just, raise every little issue, because
Well, we should raise some, because there are a number of people in this town that have dog-eared copies of this thing, and they trot it out every 2 seconds,
Right.
Steve, we're supposed to have public meetings. Are we ever allowed to have an executive session? Like, for example, if our two attorneys come and address us, tonight this is a public meeting, but
that's not lawyer-client, it doesn't
No?
fall into
Okay.
lawyer-client, yeah. The reason for a charter commission to have an executive session would be between nil and none. I mean, they're very, if you look at FOI, we're not discussing contract negotiations, we're not discussing the acquisition of real estate, we're not discussing a wide range of things. I know one of the issues they wanted to look at, I don't know if it ended up on their list, that's not on the list, but I know that somebody, I think when I talked to the first select woman, it was on their list, and I told the town attorney there's a problem with it. They wanted to look at your provisions regarding the disposition of land. And
Change the dollar value.
there you go. And a very simple, reasonable request. In Stanford last year, I won't go into the whole story here, but I'll tell enough of it to give you a flavor of how shall I put it? Fallujah looks like a wonderful place to take a vacation compared to what we went through in Stanford last year. We were doing a fairly, this is the town that gave me 123 items on there, on whatever it was, on the list. But there's a big split between the mayor, who's a relatively new mayor, and her majority, her party majority, same party, on the Board of Representatives. And it's the difference between the pro-development group, got all the developer money, New York developer money, versus neighborhood interests that want to try to preserve some semblance of what Stanford
Used to be.
had been, et cetera. And they wanted to change a few things. They have a different zoning system. Their zoning system is one of two in the state, where if the zoning board doesn't give you what you like, you have a right to petition to go to the elected officials and overturn the zoning board and the planning board in Stanford. But if you live in a condo, only the condo association can sign the petition. So they wanted to do a simple thing and allow every resident who owned a condo to have the ability to sign a petition. Now, it sounds easy, and there are some legal impediments. The courts have looked at it in certain ways. I don't know if you do any zoning in your practice, but the courts have not been really good about condos and participation in general, but they wanted to do it. The mayor was dead set against it. They wanted to change some of the dollar amounts with regard to disposition of land. They wanted to have additional public hearings in the eminent domain front, not eliminate eminent domain, but at least have members of the public, and also for the land disposition, have members of the public participate when you're buying or selling land. They should, if the city's getting paid or the city is paying, they want to have more public hearings. To me, I didn't look at them as partisan, I looked at them as reasonable. Make your arguments one way or the other and go up or down and vote for it or vote against it. They're all reasonable positions that you could take many sides on. The mayor, and I met with the mayor, my leadership, of the commission and I met with the mayor and the corporation council, and we sat down and we said, look, I think we have made these people who are very strong views on the issue, narrow their issues down. I think there's room for compromise. Oh, yeah. And then one of my, the chair or the vice chair of the commission wrote a note to the mayor the next day, included me on the note. Mayor, we really should get together. We got everybody ready to, we really could settle this thing and work out a compromise. Never happened. So the item gets voted out of the commission into the Board of Reps, the legislative body, as years will go back into the Board of Selectmen. And there's a 6-hour hearing, and the mayor's people, what's that?
Sounds like your board of.
Yeah, and the mayor's people are vicious, yelling and screaming that Bernie Sanders doesn't run this city, and so neither does Donald Trump, and everybody's going back and forth, and all these arguments, and.
Was this about the ability to mask the numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so here's the story. Here's what happened. We didn't know this. The people on either side of the debate didn't know it, but 2 weeks earlier, the mayor put into the last night of the legislative session, something they call a rat. You know what a rat is? You have an omnibus bill with a lot of stuff. There's a bill called the implementer at the end of the legislative session. It's designed to hide a lot of stuff. What the mayor was able to get her former colleagues to put an implementer into it was actually a revenue package, a bill that prevented charter commissions from amending the charter to change petition requirements. There was some other vague thing, which I still don't understand. You couldn't change the charter with regard to eminent domain procedures and with land disposition procedures, money, time, whatever, thresholds, caps, whatever it might be. Law, state law. And remember I said earlier, there have been very few dilutions of the Municipal Powers Act. Well, there was a big one last year, where you are prevented from doing something. It wasn't an express grant of authority. It was an express, stripping of authority. I've never, in all my years of doing municipal work, seen that. It was really, I know I'm being filmed here, and I love the Mayor of Stamford. She's a delightful person. But I want to point out that I vehemently disagree. We're changing that. We're fixing that. When I told your town attorney about that, because I knew that was one of the issues that you guys were going to look at, he said, I can't believe that. I said, here's the bill. And so we're working on that right now. I think that the eminent domain and disposition provisions will clearly be taken care of. But that's an example of how bad it can be. I don't think that's going to be a problem. This is 29 charters now. I've done 29 different charters throughout the state of Connecticut. I've never had anything closely approximating what happened in Stamford. It's totally aberrational, but it does affect you, and because there's unintended consequences of what occurred. So then you're going to develop your priorities. Are there structural things you have to deal with? I don't know, but that could be one of the issues. It's simply what I call a tune-up and a cleanup. That'll be up to you when we get
Well, I
through.
think one of the things was gender neutral, the issue.
Yeah, that's not.
I do neutrality all the time. It's very easy.
What are you using?
I avoid pronouns. I avoid pronouns altogether. So I'd have to go through the document. I just did it in Waterbury.
Well, it says
We can't.
selectman in here,
Yeah, it
not
has to be
select
like a
woman,
select-
it's like.
Yeah, you have to decide what you want to call it. We were doing that in Fairfield. Their charter failed, but they were going to select person.
Massachusetts went to
select board.
Board.
Select board, I know. So some things are hard, but the he and she, you decide what you want to do with your titles. New Haven went to the Board of Alders 12 years ago. Waterbury is considering moving from the Board of Aldermen to the Board of Alders. Fairfield was moving to select person, but with the rest of the neutrality, taking all the pronouns and eliminating the pronouns, but we can talk about that. That's
It's an easy fix.
What's that?
It's an easy fix.
That's an easy fix. There's some syntax issues involved. You have to do some restructuring of sentences to make those things work, but it's easy to do. So let me just conclude, then I'll walk you through the timeline. You want to understand the functions of government, you have to decide whether your charter is a constitution. And when I say like a constitutional kind of document, I'm using the terms broadly. It's not a constitution, it's a charter. but I'm saying it in the sense that the Constitution really sets up broad structures, then the legislature or the Congress is supposed to pass statutes, and you're supposed to pass ordinances. And so how detailed do you want the document to be or to remain? It's a tricky assignment. One of the things I want to point out is in terms of your scope, and the chair, the entire board needs to be, the entire commission needs to be aware of this, is I always tell people you're independent, you have full authority to do anything you want to do. But keep in mind, as your question was, on
Gotta
the
get it
point is,
passed.
you gotta get it passed. You gotta get through the board of selectmen, number one, and then you gotta get through the voters, number two. And so, you need to be realistic about what it is that you can accomplish, what is feasible, what is legally feasible, what is politically feasible, all those things come into account. So, summarizing, no implied powers, express powers, we have to follow Title VII, which is the Home Rule Act, and you need to be aware of collective bargaining agreements, MIRA, and all that kind of stuff. So we're now starting the process. We talked about a little bit of it a moment ago. You've been created, there were 2 resolutions. One of the things I was really pleased to see the composition of this, and it's a trend that I've been urging people to take in this process, is to not be party-centric. I think it's really important. When I started doing this like 30 years ago, my hair was a little different shade of color. And I used to call this white wig
Me
stuff.
too.
Yeah, I used to call it white wig, now I have a white wig, but it's.
Well, you look like a barrister.
There you go, or a solicitor. I'm a barrister, I'd rather be a barrister than a solicitor. I'll come with my robe next time. And I view this as a really high call, one of the highest callings for local government. Even when I was an alderman, charter revision meant something to me. Even when I was an ambitious young politician, I always got upset because back then in New Haven, the Democratic chairman was on, the Republican chairman was on. They had to protect their turfs. And as I started doing charters in the 90s, was when I really started doing it as a lawyer, I saw a lot of that, and I would get really, short with it because I said, this is not.
What's partisan about it?
There's not. That's the point.
Well, I
Thank you.
think the other thing too is that you have to take the people out of it. A lot of times people get hung up on people that are in positions and they go after that
I don't
particular
have to say that now. Yeah, exactly. right.
position. So
Yeah.
you don't do that. You just take people out of it, and this is, no matter what it is, you wanna make it better for,
You don't write your
The
charter because of something you don't like today. You revise your charter if there's a chronic problem that has existed that needs to be fixed. Or if you see a reform that could be helpful for the future. But you don't write it because you don't like your mayor or your first selectman or the.
Is that why the recall provision is only listed to 5 towns?
Yeah, what is that, how come they got,
Because they got it in special acts.
but
and
how do
ordinance.
they get, how, I mean, how?
you write a special act, it has to go before the general assembly.
Yeah, these were all done
Oh, so
before
it's all
19.
the cities and.
These were all done before 1957. New Haven's one of them. But New Haven, you can't recall the mayor, you can only recall aldermen, which I thought was interesting. And the other 4 are chief executives that you recall. But, and that's only because they were there, like, why does Norwalk have gun control? Somebody wanted to do something, the bars were probably, they had problems regulating their bars and restaurants, so we need to be able to control and regulate firearms.
Well, Torrington
Might
is
try and
the,
force it.
Torrington is the only town in the state of Connecticut where someone buys the tax book and collects the money. You don't do that anywhere else.
What do you mean someone buys a tax?
Well, they collect themselves privately and then they turn the money back to the city of Norfolk. They were the only ones. I don't know if they still do it or not.
Tax collectors, interesting.
Yeah, and that's why you had bonds for tax collectors back in the day, which you don't really need anymore because the money goes right into a lockbox when it comes into the city. So it's not a partisan activity. You're not permitted to have more than a simple majority of any party. I've been encouraging a lot of my towns not to have a majority of either party and to try to recognize unaffiliated voters. I think we do have an unaffiliated on this. There you go. 2.
The town has been in a different place than it is now. I mean, at one time, this could have been very politically charged. I think that we're intelligent, this group here is intelligent enough and engaged enough that it won't be a politically charged.
Oh yeah, I'm not
event.
lecturing. I'm not lecturing.
No,
Yeah.
but I'll tell you, it's one thing that, although I really think that we have to be as broad and listen to everybody, give everybody the opportunity, as many people who wanna speak and give their opinion, we have to give them that opportunity. One of the things that I have in the past, and I will gotta shut down political BS.
Well, I, for example, have been getting some emails, texts, phone calls, because unfortunately I'm all over the internet, about getting rid of minority representation. And I think.
Minority party representation.
Yeah, but isn't that enabled in the state statute?
It's statutory
So-
for at-large and for boards and commissions and et cetera.
There's some, but like New London doesn't have it, so it would be a special act,
It would have to be.
because they're all Democrats, so they can't have it.
Oh, no, London doesn't have it. If they have districts, you don't have minority party representation. On a
We have
single
voting
district,
districts.
single voting districts, it's one party against the other, or multiple parties, whoever wins, wins. The way it works is if you have an at-large system, you have minority party representation. If you have a hybrid form of government, the statute permits you to have, to have it or not have it. If you have a district component, the view of the state law is it gives the voters an opportunity to elect people from any party they want, and therefore you have a right, when you're creating the at-large component, to not have minority party representation. Norwalk has that. And as a result, Norwalk on a 15-member body only has one Republican. I'm a fairly strong believer in when you have an at-large system, you really should have minority party representation. Here's the misnomer of minority party representation. Once you hit a cap of your majority party, let's say it's the Republicans, you have a Republican majority, the minority doesn't have to be Democrats, it has to be non-Republicans. And it could be unaffiliated, it could be communists, Marxists, Democrats, family.
It's more maximum representation, isn't it?
That's exactly right. It's a cap on majority party representation. That's what the way the rule works, but you can't get rid of it for the boards and commissions. So then you have your hearings, and what happens is once we're done and we start laying out the priorities, what we'll be doing is you'll be setting up a regular schedule of meetings. To the extent you want me involved, I very often will put together background documents for you if you want to look at, let me give you an example, you want to look at the budget process. Well, you're on the Board of Finance, so you probably know more than anybody will know. But if you don't like your budget process, I'm not saying you shouldn't.
I don't like it, so.
Well, whatever, so, but if that's something we look at, what I would look at is look at other communities similarly situated. I'm not gonna compare you to New Haven or Bridgeport or New Britain. It'd be other towns, Board of Selectmen towns, town meeting towns, Board of Finance towns. Take a look at how their structures work. Are there differences? Are there things you should think about modifying? And I would put a panel together of finance directors and other people who are expert in the area of public finance to talk about things so that you can think about tweaking it, modifying it, whatever you want to do. I'm not saying you should do that, that's just an example I'm throwing out. We can do that in any area that you have in your budget,
I have a
in
listing,
your charter.
a listing of all the municipalities and the titles that they have for their chief executive officers and contact people. You know, if we wanna go through. Glastonbury is about the same size, and now look at a Glastonbury that has a lot of similar, I don't know if Glastonbury has just selectmen or not.
Yeah, so, if I could, Marcia, I appreciate
You don't
the
wanna go into
information
that,
that you
right?
brought. Yeah, probably when we talk, that's more substantive, and we should probably wait until we've had the public hearing first, and then when we do some priority setting, that's when it becomes more important. But right now, let's continue.
But I think we still can do research. I mean, there's a lot that's going on, and I don't think it hurts to get some, look at some towns.
You can all learn whatever you want to learn, but you can't do substantive work until you get through the public hearing. Once you get through the public hearing, you can start doing,
You can start doing
tackling
that.
issues.
You all have your ideas, now is not the time to discuss them, but please do whatever research. And one of the things that I think that we might be able to do is rely on Steve, if we have some questions like you brought here, what do other communities do? And so that's something, if we want you to do it, we'll ask you to do it.
And and I have a lot of resources, I'm very close to, the heads of cost, the Council of Small Towns, and CCM. I do a lot of legal work for CCM, but I'm very close to Betsy Guerra at cost as well. And Joe DeLong and Betsy are great resources if we want to bring them in to talk generally about issues facing towns of your size. They're really good folks. And that's why I was asking about Zoom, not just for me, but it'd be much easier to be able to get some of these people to participate if we could somehow Zoom them in.
I'm sure we can set up Zoom, and Zoom other people in for our particular benefit, but we just don't have a big screen just in case, the members of the public wanna see
Yeah,
it.
that's a good point.
But-
Unless we
Nowhere in
get it at
City Hall,
school.
nowhere in Town Hall, there's no place.
So, you know something, we could do it at the police station, I don't know what the, and
It's hard, well, you know what, with Thursday nights now available.
is it really?
Yeah, we should snag it up if we can, because the RTC foolishly, I'm told, has left it on
Okay.
Thursday nights.
Yeah, Thursdays.
As far as I know, that's tentative at this point, I don't think
Oh,
it's been
okay.
decided.
Okay, because I don't think they should have.
I was gonna talk about scheduling because I wanna make sure that I'm available to you. Thursday is a good night for me. Thursday is my Salem night, so if we could leapfrog over each other, that would be really helpful to have a dedicated night for that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So then you go through almost a year, no less than a year, of deliberations, of meetings, fact-finding meetings, due diligence sessions, hopefully not too many lectures from me, but backgrounders from me during the process. And we'll start doing drafting. When we come out with those priorities, you may say, Steve, we want to do gender neutrality. That may be something, I'm just using that as an example of a simple thing to do. We want to do gender neutrality, can you start doing that? And that's an easy lift that you can get started with. I don't know,
Can I ask you a procedural question?
please.
So, one element in this proposed change that the selectmen would like to see is time sensitive. Is it factual that if you, that once the charter commission goes through, makes a recommendation and whatnot, but doesn't complete its work, for example, that it has to be terminated and then reconstituted? So that is true. And there's no chance to get this done by this election cycle.
Well, they've already set the date for the 2025 election cycle and your draft report comes in.
Well, they,
The only way you might be able to change it, I think, and there's nothing in the statute that says you can, so I'd be concerned about it, is if you got your work done, it's April 11th.
right, I don't know
There's
what
no way you
the-
can get it done.
there's no
this
way,
year.
okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why you can't do it. Waterbury's doing it, but Waterbury started 3 months earlier, and that is ambitious, but it's what I call a tune-up. So we should be able to get it done. We need to be done by August, completely done by August, so you can get your questions into the Secretary of State the first week of
Oh.
September.
So there's
Get it
something
in the
else, okay,
That's the problem. And so there's no way
okay.
you get this done for this year, starting in April. It just doesn't happen. If you have one thing to do, we can do it next week and, have your public hearing, get it done, and put it on the
But
ballot.
you do in fact have to terminate the commission and reconstitute it.
You'd have to terminate the
Once we-
reconstitution. Yeah, if there was something that they wanted to get done and get it on the ballot this year, but they didn't allow for that in their resolution. They didn't, the resolution has
Well, I think they just assumed it was a foregone impossibility, but
Yeah,
I'm just
by that
double
time,
checking.
yeah, no, that's the way it works. So then you're gonna go through that process. We have April 1st, they gave you an early date, which is fine. And then what happens is after you give it to them, it goes back to the Board of Selectmen. You have your last public hearing. So your first question on the public hearing is, the first public hearing is to get from the public what they want us to do. The last public hearing is to show them your draft report and ask them to comment on your draft report to make any changes that you'd like to make based on their commentary before you send it to the Board of Selectmen. So then once you get through that process, you report your draft out to the Board of Selectmen. They've got up to 60 days, they don't have to use the entire 60 days to go through the document. There's a conferral meeting where all of you sit together in a room and you tell the Board of Selectmen, this is why we've done what we've done. Now, if we're doing this right, the chair will be talking to the first selectman on a regular basis. The chair and the vice chair, or the full commission, will be talking on a fairly regular basis to keep them up to date on where we're going, what the direction is, as a public process, they can look it up anyhow, but I think it's important to make sure that you maintain a dialogue, because if you're going off, if you decide that you wanna have a town manager form of government, you know, and don't tell anybody about it, just put it in your report, it may be problematical. Would be problematical in all probability, but, so then it goes to them, they have up to 45 days, by 45 days, on or before the 45th day, they have to have a public hearing, and then within 14 days of their public hearing, they then act on it. If they approve it as is, it's a final report and you're out of business. They then develop the questions, put them on the ballot. You don't have anything to say about the questions. You may, if you have a good relationship, make recommendations, but they're the political people, they're the ones who get to develop the questions. If they have questions or recommendations, it then comes back to you for 30 days. And then you have 30 days to respond to their recommendations. And if you approve all the recommendations, in all probability, they'll approve your report. If there's a dispute, hopefully you negotiate it. If you don't negotiate it, you may lose something at the final action. They have to act within 15 days of the receipt of the final report, and then they act on it. They can vote it up or down, they can vote it up in part, they vote it down in part, or they can reject the whole thing.
Are they the final authority, or is there?
They're the final authority, but it then goes to the voters.
Yeah, but if they reject it,
If they reject it, it's over,
is there
except
a is there a
Well,
petitioning process or something?
somebody could petition, but it's an entirely different process. They probably wouldn't be able to get it on for this ballot, they'd probably have to get it on for another ballot. So they probably couldn't do it fast enough to get the petition through. I've never done a petition, all the charters I've done, I've never been involved in the petition process.
No,
No,
the
there's some
general-
crazies here.
The general statute also talks about updating the selectmen. Does that have to be a written update to the selectmen about the status and there was some notification to the selectmen about the charter revision periodically, there's,
In the statutes,
I believe so.
I've never seen that. I think you should, I don't, it doesn't have to be in writing.
Well, clearly we should, because that
Yeah.
will avoid
Yeah,
having it kicked back to us.
yeah, you wanna
I would
make
think
sure.
the minutes, would the minutes be satisfy that or no?
The minutes would satisfy, but at the same time, you wanna have
Still
ongoing
have,
dialogue.
right, I understand.
I think you wanna have a dialogue.
I think they'll attend. a lot of it.
And they may show up at meetings, and that's a helpful thing. But you wanna have a regular dialogue. I know that over the course of time, I talk to mayors and first selectmen all the time during the processes, to keep them up to date and try to explain to them legally why we're doing certain things. And so that's the process, and so, at the end of the process, they develop the questions, it goes to the ballot. You have, the ability as a town, it'd be up to the board, it'd be up to the town meeting, or it'd be up to the board of selectmen at the town meeting to decide to do an explanatory text. An explanatory text would permit local government to spend money on a document that would be distributed before the election that tells you this is what we did in chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. It's a really good objective, not an advocacy document. So we did this because we think it's wonderful, or we did this because the other provision was awful. It would be, here's what we did. And so it gives members of the public that ability. You also publish your changes in a local paper of general circulation by statute. And that's the process. And lastly, I won't get too much about me, but the use of counsel, and I'll talk to town attorney about it, you should talk to them as well, is as much or as little as you want.
Now, can we go back on the public,
Please.
publicizing? We have two newspapers in Stonington. One is the Westerly Sun and the other is The Day. And I know there was one time where we were told not to publish in one of the papers. And I think, and the general statutes has changed a lot also about how people are notified because you have a town website and it is a most sufficient means of notifying and should, I would think we should publish in both papers, but I don't know what the feeling is on those things.
It's a newspaper of general circulation within the community. And that's a statutory requirement, you have no choice. I think it's an ancient provision, I think there's other ways you could do those things now, but the statute requires that we, and it's
It'd be newspapers.
the newspapers.
Especially when you consider, I mean, the last election, how many people came into the polls and said, think, you know, what's going on and everything. what was in the paper. I don't get the paper.
Yeah.
I don't read the local papers.
Most of my communities are changing. One of the things I'm sorry,
What has to be published?
the charter revisions, changes in the charter.
Right, and what I was gonna suggest, by the way, is something a little bit different to encourage participation. You know, our minutes will be on, I think will be online, our agenda will be online.
Right.
After tonight, I intend to, we should set, tonight, we're going to set a date for the public hearing, and I'll do a press release or contact both papers. And it'll also be part of our agenda too, so,
It should be posted on the website, the city's
Yeah.
website, and that kind of stuff.
so, and the goal is to let give people enough time so they know about it and so they can be here, because, we don't want anybody to say that they didn't get the notice, so.
We have to be careful though that we have a meeting room for what we.
So this is not, yes, we do, and we always will have this place.
Oh, but-
Upstairs is bigger, we probably can accommodate 50 people, easily upstairs.
Oh.
Yeah, and you probably could accommodate 50 down here, but it's just not set up right now. Upstairs is kind of set up, and it's a little more open, and so it's probably a better place to do it, but we can't accommodate 50 people upstairs. I would much rather have it at the police station, but if we can't have it at the police station, that's fine, because it gives us more flexibility and more airability.
I may have been misinformed, so you know something about that, because the only available time at the PD is this one meeting that occurs on a monthly basis, which the rumor is that you guys decided you weren't doing that. You're having it there.
That's a rumor at this point, it
It
hasn't
has,
been
but
confirmed
do you know when they're gonna decide that?
yet. Hopefully by next month.
What Thursday night, Dave?
Usually it's the third Thursday of every month.
So,
And was it 7 o'clock? Is that when they usually have them?
Yes. Well,
My
6,
Thursday's the first and
6
third in Salem, so the third.
so you can't, so it has to be the second or fourth. for
Okay,
you.
4th isn't gonna, I got
Let me double check.
conflict there.
Let me just double check that. Let me just double check.
Because everybody's like this.
No, mine is the second and the fourth. I'm the second and the
That's
fourth
kicking
now,
off here.
so I can do the first and the third.
First and third.
Yeah.
Okay.
Board of Ed.
And Board of Ed meets that night. So that was the impetus for changing it. Some people.
There may be a couple of conflicts as Waterbury's charter winds down, but in general, like the first and third, we work the way.
Okay. So, you know, we may be able to do it at the police station next time, not do it on the third Thursday, which is, but we'll talk about that in a few
Yeah, yeah.
minutes after Steve does his finishes.
And the high school auditorium is always a good place for a hearing too, in the sense that it's big and it's more available. Yeah, it's hard to hear up there.
Well, if we get a lot of people, you'd have to adjourn some.
Right, you would,
You're in
that,
a
and
position.
so that's, like I said, I went upstairs earlier tonight, looked at it, they could accommodate 50 people. I mean, I hope we don't get 50 people, but,
So,
No, I don't remember any of the meetings of the charter commission last time that, we were in the police station back then.
Yeah.
Until they did the hearing, and they probably did the hearing in the
Oh, the
auditorium.
hearing, there were a lot of people at that hearing.
Yeah, there were a lot of people at the hearing, but I don't think it was at the police station.
No, I thought it was I thought it was at the auditorium.
I don't think so.
I don't remember if it was the first or the second hearing, but there were, at that time, there were a lot of people. But I will say, sitting on a lot of boards and commissions, that attendance is declining rapidly for everything.
so,
that's interesting.
yeah, in general, I would conclude that I'm here to provide legal advice. Town attorney is also available. I think they're trying to dichotomize it so that he can represent the board of selectmen in the process, and I'd be representing the commission in the process. But I can guarantee you that I will be coordinating with the town attorney because he knows where the potholes are. I do not. I don't pretend to come into a community and try to have a chauvinistic view that I know everything because I don't know anything about Stonington, except I really love the borough of Stonington. But it's, but local culture is important, folkways are important. You you guys know where the ghosts are and where the bodies are buried, I do not. So it's important, as we go through this process, if I lay out examples for you, you need to know that they're general examples that have worked in other communities, and you're not cookie cutters. There's no process that works for everybody. You need to figure out how does it work for Stonington. That's the really important thing. That's what you need to tell me as we're going through this process. I'll do research and backup. That doesn't mean that you guys can't do it and look at things. But if you are doing something like going through that, is one of the things I do is I do comparative analyses of those towns. If you have towns, by looking at your list that you think, Steve, I think you should look at these 10 towns because they look like our town, because you know it or you see it on the list, tell me. And I'll gather the data. It's pretty easy for me to do that. And the other thing is I hope to be able to help you if I'm at your meetings, to help you with deliberations and facilitate discussion, particularly if you start going down a road that would be problematic. And I will talk to the town attorney about the term limit issue from a legal perspective, and they have to decide whether that's an issue they want to tackle politically. I will not bring it up unless I'm asked about it. So I don't want to cause trouble, but if the question comes up, we talked about
We're
publicly.
on camera.
Yeah, we're on camera, but it's important. It's an important issue, and you guys need to grapple with it.
Well, one thing that they did do, again, from the practical perspective, is that you have term limits, and then you have to take a break for a term,
And you come
and
back.
then you can come back.
Yeah.
So the practical implication of that is even if you were to challenge it, you wouldn't get through the court system anyway before you could be reelected. So,
Well, if you do it in the election cycle, you could probably get the courts to move it pretty.
oh, really?
Yeah, look.
I've been bogged down in the
Or
courts
in
for 10 years.
Bridgeport, you could end up having your election in March. You don't want to be
From
Bridgeport.
jail.
And I say that respectfully. You don't want to be Bridgeport. And so, and I've done Bridgeport,
I prefer
sure.
not to do something illegal.
So,
No, I'm talking about Mayor
I think
Ganem.
I think that's pretty much it for me.
Might I suggest, would you take your calendars out, let's pick the next meeting. And if we could do it before 7 o'clock, I'd like to do that. The only reason that I did it 7 o'clock tonight is because of one of the, I don't know who I talked with first, but somebody said, it would be good to do it at 7 o'clock, that way people had a chance to go home and have something to eat. I don't wanna get up, listen, we've gone already 10 minutes over the hour that I wanted to go, and that's because Steve talks a lot.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the.
Sorry, that's true.
But the,
Yeah, cool.
thank you very much, by the way.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
really, and you guys are too engaged, you really are. So anyways, but in any effect, my suggestion is the first, May 2nd. And I'm gonna see if I can get the police station, and perhaps we start at 6 o'clock.
That'll be your public hearing.
That'll be the public hearing.
I won't be there. You don't really need me at your public hearing.
Okay,
I have my red line session with Salem that night. So,
if you want us to, okay.
I'll leave it up to you. I don't think I need to be at your public hearing. Only if, actually at Salem, I said I don't need to be at a public hearing. One of the commissioners said, what if somebody brings something up that is legally untenable? I said, well, we'll deal with it another time, but I'm going to their public hearing. But I don't think
But,
you absolutely.
and realistically speaking, it's something, if it's something is not tenable, we're not going to discuss it, we're just fact finding.
Listen to them.
We're just
Don't
listening.
engage, yeah.
Yeah, we're not engaging on
Yeah.
that first evening anyways,
Exactly,
so it's
so-
listening and taking notes, and we will, and after that, then we'll be able to.
Yeah.
To have that discussion.
So you're,
May 2nd at what time?
May 2nd, 6 o'clock, I'm sorry, Derek, go ahead.
I don't know if I'm allowed to comment. When I was set up with this job with Stacy, I told her that I do another commission on the first Thursday of every month.
Okay,
Obviously, I'm just a minute taker, so if you do the first Thursday, you just would have to find somebody else to do it.
okay,
Yeah, I do the Inland and Wetlands Commission on the first Thursday.
Alright.
So again,
what time is that, by the way? Well, it's-
it is at 7, so
Yeah.
this does allow some leeway. If it's a public hearing, it could be open-ended in terms of how long it lasts. So
Yeah.
it's totally up to you guys. It doesn't affect me, obviously, but.
Talk to me, I have no problem with going to, with going to May, the second Thursday, May 9th. One of the reasons, listen, I'd like to, I'd like to do what we can as quick as we can, but we have to take our time. We really do, and we have to be thoughtful about this. And we do have plenty of time, but I don't want to get into a position where we're crunched at the end of the game. So, you know, the first hearing, which is the public hearing, I want to give people enough notice that they can come and they don't have an excuse later on to say, guess what, we didn't get enough notice. So, I have no problem with the 9th if.
Because that would give it 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Now, when does the, just,
Doesn't have to.
no, but when does the Democratic Town Committee meet?
I don't know, I'm not on it anymore.
Oh, that's right, sorry, Judy.
So,
It's
Because I was
okay.
thinking, if the 2 town committees can let their people know about a public hearing, that's another avenue to get the word out.
right, I'll let them, I'll let them know. I mean, I don't, quite frankly, I don't care when their meeting is. And if they wanna come here and make their meeting over here, or make it part of what they do, because it'll be like a road trip for them, that's fine.
Mhm.
But I wanna hear from them, but by the same token, I'm not concerned about our conflict with it.
It will conflict with meetings all over the place. We
Because it
really
is,
have
it's
to
gonna,
just-
it's gonna, yeah.
Some will have
so-
to, you know,
But I don't
have to
know,
prioritize what's
let me
important
ask
to them.
right now, May 2nd or May 9th, what do you,
I'm indifferent.
okay,
I would say May 9th, because it's very hard to get someone to take minutes.
That is true, that's hard now too.
May 9th. Derek, because of you, we're doing it on May 9th.
Honored.
There you go.
Obviously, that ever
No, it's not.
changes. I'm not offended if you guys ever go a different route, but.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, and what time?
6 o'clock? 6 o'clock.
And you're gonna shoot for the police station?
I am going to shoot for the police station,
Okay.
yes. Let's go through that meeting and then we'll, do we have to set regular meetings tonight?
No, but somebody you should, and get into the town clerk so it can be regular and not special.
Let's wait until, next meeting and we will consider when we'll do our regular meetings then.
So this will be a special.
Yeah, I guess it.
Yeah, they gotta be special too.
Well, it is a special meeting, it's very special, it's the public.
The difference between a special meeting and
You
regular
can't
meeting is
put
you
anything on
can't
the
amend the agenda.
Yeah.
But what you could do, if you
Can
run
you
into a
send
problem,
us
you can just notice another special
Can
meeting.
he email us a copy of his history of charter? That was very
I'll be
interesting.
happy to.
I like history.
Oh, this stuff here?
Yeah.
If you do that, then I can get CLA credit for
All right,
it.
I should be able to get it for writing it.
Yeah, you should, absolutely should.
Yeah.
You should
Wow.
get it for
I like
presenting
that. That's
tonight.
a great.
I know,
great.
yeah,
If
well,
you get the charter out of the Charter Oak, you know, that's really.
Wow.
that's, I can get CLA for that. When I was on the police commission, I went to the police the conventions, and I got CLEs for that.
Did
It's a
you?
great thing, yeah.
It's really,
It's a great thing.
Huh.
It's a fantastic thing.
I should talk about my charter lectures. I mean, I-
Absolutely
I do 3 a
are
year, I should
qualified to do
probably-
that.
I'll have like 12,
Absolutely.
yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
No, what do I learn? Hey, I'm not charging you for tonight, I got some good advice. That's for that's not for the record.
All right. There you go, then, if anybody has anything they wanna say for the good of the cause, please say it, otherwise I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
All right.
Thank you so much, we really appreciate it.
Pleasure.